261 pound-feet of torque at a relatively high 4,400 RPM. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a carryover engine to me. Actually, you would be wrong, and there are 3 reasons why. Number 1, the parts, 61% of them are new. Number 2, they pilfered some of the technology from the GTR. Remember our Nismo GTR episode? We shot actually not far from here at Music City Raceway. I still very much miss that car. Anyway, they took the concept of the sodium-filled valves and applied it here. And the logic there is to lower the overall engine temperature, an engine that runs cooler, runs more efficiently. And then third, and this is I think my most favorite change here, is the intake runners. They are both shorter and wider. And basically that gets more air into the engine. So like an old Pontiac guy like me thinking that a Nissan has like ram air, I kind of like that. Anyway, but that also translates to an engine that gets more air, gets more power. But in this, guys, what they're able to do is get 300 horsepower while simultaneously hitting 25 mpg. So before we unpack the driving dynamics of the 3.5-liter V6 in this Maxima, let's go back to the 3.7. That's in the Nismo Z, the 2015 we drove back in January. And in that episode, I think we all agreed that car is not underpowered. It's just, in today's day and age, a performance car like that should have more power. So with that as our framework, let's take a look at this as really what it is, which is kind of like an upwardly mobile family car with a bit of a sporting flair. And with that in mind, 300 horsepower, more than enough in this case. There's never an instance where you feel this car is underpowered. If I'm really being nitpicky and I put my foot into this thing, the pulling power, the torque comes in a bit late, so there's a little bit of a delay in acceleration, but at the end of the day, there's never an instance where you're going to say the 3.5 in this car is underpowered. So good news, bad news. Bad news for us car guys, every 2016 Nissan Maxima will be fitted with anything you want as long as it's a CVT. Now the good news, when we shot the world premiere of this car, we were joined by the car's product manager, Vish Nujayamoyan. Now Vish, he's a good friend, so he was kind enough to put the question out to you guys, what would you like to see in future Maximas? And in a bit of a modern day version of storming the Bastille, 500 or so comments were basically, ditch the CVT. Now, like you, I am a bit of a Lotus freak and everybody should be driving a manual transmission. But before we condemn this particular inmate to a public drawn quartering, I feel we should try this in a court you and I know well, and that is the open road. Hear ye, transmission court now in session, Judge Motoman presiding. As we get these proceedings rolling, I would like to submit to you Exhibit A, and that is your judge. I'm the guy that drives a manual transmission in LA traffic, a Lotus Elise, to Costco to buy like 85 rolls of butt tape. So I think that is a very good giveaway of the kind of preferences I'm looking for in a car and transmissions. So with that said, let's look at the transmission here, which we already said, anything you want as long as it is a CVT. Let's look at it with the goal of the 2016 Maxima in mind, and that is to make a large family sedan that has a bit of a sporty tilt to it with very good fuel economy. If that is the case and that is the goal, absolutely have completely hit the bullseye with this transmission. This is a large car. This is a really good sized car, very unique looking, and it gets 25 plus mpg in the city, which is phenomenal. But here's the problem. We're driving the SR, and this is supposed to be the sporty model, the performance model. And there's really no other way to put this. This transmission is not well suited to the characteristics of what this car is trying to accomplish. And what's really confusing to me is this is the performance model. This is the one with the paddle shifters that are connected to the steering column like a GTR. So I just don't understand why Nissan would choose to saddle this with a CVT. I mean, Nissan in every other aspect of this car has knocked it out of the park. We already talked about what they did with the engine. And then there's the platform. It's 25% stiffer. So I don't care if it's a Maxima or a Z. If you increase the stiffness of the platform by 25%, the driving dynamics will increase multiples of that. And then this is the SR, so we already talked about it. It's got the stabilizer bar, the stiffer springs, the fancy tires, and the stiffer dampers. So I just don't understand the logic of bringing this into all that work, because really all it does is limit an otherwise amazing package. Welcome to the Dungeon O Maxima. And basically what they have here is every kind of Maxima they're ever going to make. Like this one, that's a Platinum, that's another SR, and then over there I think that's an SV. And like any other Nissan, they're going to have multiple trim levels. But really there are two things that stand out here. And number one, it's the design. And yes, I'm a frustrated designer, but you look at this thing, especially this segment, it's basically celery and meh that's out there right now. Here, especially the front 3/4 of this thing, it's a bold design. It stands out. When you go into a parking lot, you are not going to screw this thing up with anything else out there. Then second, and I would argue the most successful change, is the interior. Like, again, there's the design of this interior that is just so cool because it's got like a sports car feel to it, but more importantly are the bits. Like this suede here and on the seats, that's just not like normal suede, that's Alcantara, suede from Italy. Then the top of the doors and the top of the dash have real stitching on it, and I think really the only way to put this is the Maxima is like the woman you married. It's batting way above its station in life. So those are all the detailing bits, but I kind of like to look at an interior as, is it more than the sum of its parts? And this is where Nissan has really knocked it out of the park. And that you don't notice until you actually get your butt in the seat, because the seating position is actually quite low, and that's accentuated by a console that sits a little bit higher, which really give you this overall feeling of you're sitting in a sports car, which nothing in its segment does that. But put all it aside, I think the coolest trick is a visual trick, and it's from the outside. Like, look at the fenders. They kind of go up and out, and then there's a power bulge in the center that makes you feel like, man, this is a cool place to be. So far in this episode, we have been focusing on the performance model, which is very creatively named the SR. Now, besides a fancy rear spoiler, which is finished in black in this case, what does that mean? Well, that gives you ZF monotube dampers, stiffer springs, and a stabilizer bar. It also gives you these very handy Eagle F1 tires, which are specific to the Maxima. Now, all of that really matters not compared to something called IDM, another creative name, Intelligence Dynamic Module. Think of it as like a toned-down version of Porsche Torque Vectoring Plus. And basically what it does is it controls pitch, squat, and dive through brake activation. Now there's another feature on this, which is what they called active trace control, which think of it as like a poor man's E-diff. So when you're going around a turn, it slows down the inside wheel, giving you more control, again through the brakes. But there's a neat trick to this. There is also engine braking that is completely separate from the transmission. Very cool. Now there's one other item. Now we talked about how they pilfered technology from the GTR to make this car. Well, they couldn't help themselves, so they went over to the Nismo Z and pilfered something from that car too. So this is a sedan, right? There's still, you got to take it out and take the rud racks to school, whatever like that. So yes, it is the stiffer model, but they've taken on the SR, they've attached a front damper to the frame like they do in the new Nismo Z, and the idea is to make the ride more supple. Okay, so let's try this IDM thing, and to do that, let's put it in sport mode, go over to paddle shifters. Let's downshift a bit because we've got some turns coming up here. Let's downshift, and really the only way to get this thing to work is to drive like a maniac. Don't try this at home. So this got a nice 2 turns back to back here. So let's brake, 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 brake. Virtually no dive in the front. Go down to second. Come around here pretty aggressively. A little squealing, but virtually no lean. And let's Let's accelerate, upshift and downshift here, go back into the turn. Again, we want to drive like a maniac. There's a little bit of squat in the rear, but you could tell it's definitely managed. Let's try one more thing before we summarize here. Hard braking, hard braking, hard braking. Notice there's virtually no dive in the front. I would say it's much more successful by managing dive in the front than squat in the rear. And there's virtually no lean. And that's amazing when you consider the size of this vehicle. And maybe that has to do with that 25% stiffness. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we have a bit of a riddle. What does the 2016 Nissan Maxima have in common with the 2015 Ferrari California T? Well, in the Ferrari episode, we were presented with a car we didn't expect to like so much. But it was a car that had one thing that absolutely stood out, and that was its incredible engine. In the case of the Maxima, we didn't expect the car to be this good. The design is bold.